My name is Emma, I'm 27, and my family demanded I give my unborn baby to my sister as a second mother after she sabotaged my wedding. Before I tell you how I exposed the secret that ended her own marriage, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. 3 years of silence. 3 years of carefully constructed, fiercely protected peace. That's what I had earned after crawling out of the wreckage of my own family's betrayal. 3 years, I had built a life, a home, a marriage that was a sanctuary. And it all shattered with the familiar, dreaded ring of my phone. My mother's name flashed on the screen, and a familiar, icy dread trickled down my spine. My husband, David, was across the room, but he saw the shift in my posture, the way my hand froze midair. He was by my side in an instant, his warm hand a steadying presence on my shoulder. I took a shaky breath, a breath that felt like it was being drawn from the bottom of my lungs, and pressed the green icon. Emma, my mother's voice oozed through the speaker, a cloying, artificial sweetness that always set my teeth on edge. It was the voice she used when she wanted something. We saw your lovely announcement on social media. We're just so thrilled for you. Congratulations. There was no real warmth, no genuine joy. It was the perfunctory greeting of a stranger, a box to be checked before getting to the real agenda. I knew it. My stomach tightened into a knot. Thank you, I managed to say, my own voice a flat, dull thing. Well, darling, your father and I have been talking, she continued, the saccharine tone intensifying. And with this wonderful news, we think it's the perfect time to let bygones be bygones. It's all about the baby now, isn't it? And we've come up with the most wonderful idea, a way for the whole family to heal. I waited, my silence a wall. Vanessa is just so heartbroken, you know, with her infertility and everything. It's been a terrible ordeal. So, we were thinking, your baby should have 2 mothers. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. I was floored. The phone felt slick and heavy in my hand, a cold, dead weight against my ear. My mind went blank, a roaring static filling the space where thoughts should have been. 2 mothers? Was she certifiably insane? She was talking about my child, the tiny, precious life growing inside me, as if it were a community asset. A therapeutic tool for my sister, Vanessa. The same sister who had methodically, gleefully, burned my wedding day to the ground and salted the earth where my family relationships used to be. It would be such a tremendous help to you, dear, my mother prattled on, completely oblivious to the chasm that had just opened up in my soul. You're a first-time mom, you'll be overwhelmed. And it would mean the absolute world to Vanessa. It would give her a purpose. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to grip the edge of the counter. A hot, angry flush crawled up my neck, prickling at my skin. I couldn't speak, I couldn't breathe. I ended the call without a single word. The sudden, absolute silence in our sunlit kitchen was deafening. David pulled me into his arms, but I was rigid, a statue of shock and rage. My mind was no longer in the present. It was hurtling back 3 years, back to the lies, the empty chairs, the crushing weight of abandonment. I knew then, with a terrifying certainty that chilled me to the very marrow of my bones, that the peace I had fought so hard for was a fragile illusion. This was no longer about a stolen wedding or a broken heart. This was a declaration of war. And this time, I would not be the one left bleeding on the battlefield. Growing up, I was an afterthought. Vanessa, 3 years my senior, was the main event. She was the sun around which our family's little solar system revolved, and I was a distant, barely there moon, reflecting her light. She was the golden child, a term that doesn't even begin to cover the depth of my parents' worship. Her report cards were framed. My academic awards were tucked into a drawer. I remember in high school, we both submitted art to a local competition. My piece, a detailed charcoal sketch, won first prize in its category. Vanessa's abstract painting got an honorable mention. At the awards ceremony, my parents spent 20 minutes taking photos of Vanessa with her little ribbon, telling everyone how she had the soul of a true artist. When my name was called for first place, they gave a polite, distracted clap and my father checked his watch. Later, at home, my framed certificate was placed on a bookshelf behind a vase. Her ribbon was pinned to the main bulletin board in the kitchen. The pattern was set, and it never wavered. When I won a substantial scholarship for college, a full ride that would save them tens of thousands of dollars, I called them, my voice trembling with excitement. My mother's response was a classic. "Oh, that's wonderful, honey, really." A big relief on the college fund. "Listen, I have to run, I'm helping Vanessa pick out fabrics for her new apartment. She wants it to look just like that magazine spread. It has to be perfect." My future, my accomplishment, was reduced to a line item in their budget, a convenient problem solved so they could return to the all-important task of curating Vanessa's perfect life. We were never friends. We weren't even friendly rivals. We were just two people who shared a bloodline and a roof, and I learned early that survival depended on making myself as small and unobtrusive as possible. But when I met and fell in love with David, a man who looked at me like I was the sun, that delicate, unspoken truce began to crumble. Vanessa couldn't stand it. She couldn't stand that I had found a love that was unconditional, something she, for all her golden status, had never managed. I remember telling her we were engaged, my hand shaking as I showed her the simple, elegant ring David had chosen. She stared at it for a long moment, her lips pursed into a thin, hard line. A tight, brittle smile stretched across her face. "Well," she'd said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "let's just hope you're more careful than I was. Accidents can happen, you know. Especially when a man feels trapped." At the time, I dismissed it as a bitter jab about her own disastrous marriage. Now, looking back, I recognize it for what it was, a threat. Her marriage was a slow-motion car crash of her own making. She had married Mark, a fundamentally decent man whose only crime was having a clear vision for his own life. He was clear from their third date that he never wanted children. It wasn't a maybe, it was a definite. Vanessa, radiating the supreme confidence of someone who had never been told no in her life, saw this not as an incompatibility, but as a challenge. She was certain she could change him. For 2 years, she waged a campaign of manipulation, pressure, and emotional blackmail. When he didn't buckle, she didn't reevaluate her choices. She simply recast herself as the tragic heroine, moving back in with our parents and weeping about her cruel, unfeeling husband who was denying her the one thing she was born to do, be a mother. Our family, of course, bought it completely. They wrapped her in cotton wool, fueling her narrative of victimhood. And right in the middle of this self-inflicted melodrama, I was blissfully, naively, planning my wedding. The confrontation happened in the family kitchen, the same room where her art show ribbon still hung, faded but prominent. "You can't possibly get married now," my mother had said, her voice dripping with a familiar, weary disappointment in me. "You have to think of your sister's feelings. A wedding right now? It would be a slap in the face. It would be utterly cruel." I was dumbfounded. I felt the floor tilt beneath my feet. Postpone my wedding? My wedding to the man I love? Because Vanessa is getting a divorce from a man she knew never wanted kids? "It's the least you can do, Emma," my father chimed in, not even looking up from his newspaper. "She's your sister. Family comes first." The least I could do. My entire existence had been a string of the least I could do's for Vanessa. And for the first time in my life, a spark of rebellion ignited within me. "No," I said. My voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. "I love my sister, but I am not setting my happiness on fire to keep her warm. I am not postponing my wedding." It was a declaration of independence, and they treated it like a declaration of war. My parents announced they wouldn't attend. It hurt, a deep, aching wound. But I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. That was just the opening salvo. Vanessa, enraged that I had dared to defy her, unleashed her full arsenal. She started a vicious whisper campaign. She called our aunts, our uncles, our cousins, crying hysterically. She told them I was consumed by a dark, twisted jealousy. She concocted an elaborate fantasy where I had been secretly meeting with Mark, poisoning his mind against her, convincing him to leave her because I couldn't bear the thought of her having a child before me. It was pure fiction, a plot from a bad soap opera. I'd had maybe 3 conversations with Mark in my entire life. But Vanessa was a master storyteller, especially when she was the star. The RSVPs became a torrent of no's. One by one, the people who had watched me grow up chose to believe the golden child's lies over the shadow's truth. But the final, most depraved act of sabotage came a week before the wedding. I was addressing the last of the place cards when the phone rang. It was the venue coordinator, a kind woman named Sarah. Her voice was hesitant, full of professional pity. "Emma, I'm so sorry to bother you," she started, "but I just need to confirm the cancellation of your event for next Saturday." My blood turned to ice. The cancellation? What are you talking about? We haven't cancelled anything. Oh, she said, and I could hear the confusion in her voice. Well, we received a call this morning from a woman who said she was your sister, Vanessa. Your maid of honor? She was very distraught. She said there had been a terrible family tragedy and the wedding was off indefinitely. She was very specific. I dropped the phone. It clattered onto the hardwood floor. I just stood there, in my sun-filled living room surrounded by tulle and ribbon, and I shattered into a million pieces. This wasn't just a prank. This was a calculated, cruel attempt to erase my joy, to wipe my most important day off the calendar. The next 48 hours were a blur of frantic, tearful phone calls. David was my anchor in the storm. His family, my future in-laws, mobilized like an army, calling every hotel, every restaurant, every public park. By some miracle, we found a new place, a small, lovely restaurant with a garden that had a last-minute opening. My wedding day was beautiful, but it was a bittersweet, fractured beauty. I walked down the aisle on the arm of my father-in-law, my own father having chosen to comfort the saboteur instead of celebrating with his daughter. I looked out at the guests, and my side of the aisle was a sea of empty chairs, each one a testament to my sister's poison. I smiled for the photos, I danced the first dance, but behind the facade, I was making a vow. I would never be this vulnerable again. I would never let them have this power over me. I cut them off. Cleanly and completely. For 3 years, I built a fortress of peace around my new life, my new family. And now, with one phone call, they were back, not with a white flag, but with a battering ram, trying to smash down my walls to get to my child. After that first, mind-bending phone call, I spent the rest of the day in a daze. I tried to find a rational explanation. Maybe it was just my mother's clumsy, tone-deaf way of trying to bridge the gap. Maybe they were so steeped in their own dysfunction that they genuinely couldn't see how monstrous their suggestion was. David, ever the pragmatist, wasn't buying it. "This isn't a misunderstanding, Em," he said, his jaw tight with anger. "This is a hostile takeover bid for our baby." He was right, of course. My desperate hope for a shred of decency in them was just a ghost of the daughter I used to be. The proof came the next evening. The phone rang again. This time, I let David answer, putting it on speaker. It was my father. "Emma, your mother told me you were unreceptive to her idea," he began, his voice carrying the weight of a deeply disappointed CEO addressing a failing subordinate. Unreceptive? I shot back, the shock now replaced by a simmering rage. "Dad, she asked me to hand over my unborn child to Vanessa like a pass-the-parcel prize. How, exactly, was I supposed to receive that? With a thank you note?" "Now, there's no need for that tone," my mother's voice chirped from the background. They were a united front. "You're being overly dramatic, as usual. We're simply talking about family helping family. Vanessa would be a wonderful support system. A second mother. It takes a village, you know. She doesn't need a second mother." I yelled, my voice cracking. She has a mother. Me. And she has a father. And she has grandparents who actually love her parents. Our village is full, thanks. There was a pause. Then my father cleared his throat, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Well, Emma, he said, his voice low and laced with something cold and ugly. Perhaps if you're going to be so selfish about it, your husband should consider helping Vanessa in a more direct way. He's a healthy young man. It would still be in the family, after all. A simple solution to everyone's problems. The line went dead with the weight of his words. The implication, so vile, so utterly depraved, hung in the air between me and David. He was suggesting that my husband, my partner, the father of my child, should impregnate my sister. That he should commit an act of infidelity, of profound betrayal, to give the golden child the baby she craved. It was a punch to the gut that knocked all the air from my lungs. I couldn't breathe. This was a new level of evil. They weren't just trying to take my baby, they were actively trying to destroy my marriage, the one source of unconditional love and safety in my life. A sound escaped my lips. It was a laugh, but it was a horrifying thing, a hollow, broken, ragged sound that was more sob than mirth. It scared even me. They're monsters, I whispered, looking at David, my eyes wide with a terror that went beyond anger. They're actual, real-life monsters. David's face was a thundercloud. He snatched the phone from the table. If you ever, and I mean ever, call this number again, he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl I had never heard before, you'll be hearing from our lawyer. He slammed the phone down so hard it rattled on the table. I stumbled over to the mantelpiece and picked up our wedding photo. Us, David's parents, his siblings, all beaming. And then I stared at the empty space beside us, the space my family was supposed to fill. For 3 long years, I had mourned that empty space. I had felt the phantom pain of a family that was supposed to love me unconditionally. But in that moment, staring at the photo, the grief finally, blessedly, curdled into something else. A cold, hard, clarifying rage. They hadn't just abandoned me. They were actively, malevolently, trying to annihilate every piece of my happiness. The next day, the social media assault began. It was Vanessa's signature move, death by 1,000 paper cuts, all delivered with a veneer of plausible deniability. She posted a blurry photo of herself looking wistfully out a window. The caption read, "It's a special kind of pain when your deepest struggle is used as a weapon against you by the one person who should understand. Praying for hearts to soften." My mother immediately shared it, adding her own commentary, "A mother's heart breaks for her child's pain. So proud of my daughter's grace in the face of such cruelty." And just like that, the flying monkeys were unleashed. The texts and private messages started flooding in from aunts, uncles, and cousins I hadn't heard from in years. "Emma, I can't believe what I'm reading. Your sister is going through hell, and you're mocking her infertility? How could you be so cruel?" That one was from my Aunt Carol. "You need to call your sister and apologize immediately. Family is everything, Emma. You're the one tearing this family apart with your selfishness." That was my Uncle Mike. Tearing it apart? I wanted to scream into the void. I didn't tear it apart. I was just the first one to hold up a mirror and show them the rot that was already there. I sat on my couch, my phone buzzing incessantly with their accusations, the sheer weight of their collective, willful delusion pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. I felt small, powerless, just like the little girl whose art prize was hidden behind a vase. But then, I felt it. A tiny, insistent flutter deep inside my belly. A little kick, a little pulse of life that was mine and David's alone. A reminder of what I was fighting for. And everything shifted. The fear, the hurt, the crushing weight, it all burned away, leaving behind a core of pure, unadulterated steel. The old Emma would have cried. The old Emma would have internalized their poison, wondered if maybe she was the selfish one, the cruel one. But that Emma was gone. She had died on her wedding day, in a sea of empty chairs. In her place was a mother. And a mother protects her child. I picked up my phone, my hands steady. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to systematically dismantle their entire world with the one weapon they had never counted on me using, the cold, hard, undeniable truth. I knew my word against theirs was a losing battle. In the court of my family's opinion, Vanessa's tears would always outweigh my truth. They had spent a lifetime establishing her as the sensitive victim and me as the difficult, overly dramatic one. To win this war, I needed more than just my story. I needed irrefutable proof. I needed a weapon so powerful it would shatter their narrative beyond repair. I needed a silver bullet. And I knew exactly who was holding it. Mark. Vanessa's ex-husband. The old me, the passive, conflict-avoidant Emma, would have waited, hoped for a chance encounter, a sign from the universe. The new me, the mother bear whose cub was being threatened, didn't have time to wait for the universe. I went into action. It felt like a switch had been flipped in my brain, from emotional chaos to cold, strategic clarity. I opened my laptop, the familiar hum a comforting sound in the quiet house. I logged into LinkedIn, my movements precise and efficient. It felt strangely detached, as if I were a detective on a case, not a woman whose life was imploding. I found him easily. Mark Peterson, project manager at a major engineering firm in a city 2 states over. His profile picture was professional, he looked happy, relaxed. He had moved on. I felt a pang of guilt for what I was about to do, for dragging him back into the toxic swamp he had managed to escape. But the image of my mother's face, the sound of my father's vile suggestion, pushed the guilt away. This was a necessary evil. I spent a full hour drafting the perfect message. I wrote and rewrote it a dozen times, stripping away any hint of emotion, any trace of desperation. It had to be professional, direct, and non-threatening. Mark, it finally read, "This is Emma Collins, Vanessa's sister. I know this is entirely out of the blue, and I apologize for the intrusion. I find myself in a very difficult situation with my family, and I believe you may be the only person who can help me clarify a critical piece of information from the past. I would be incredibly grateful for 5 minutes of your time. I promise to be brief and respectful of your privacy." My finger hovered over the send button. This was it. The point of no return. I clicked it, and the message disappeared into the ether. The waiting was excruciating. For 2 days, my inbox remained empty. I checked my phone every 5 minutes, my stomach twisting into tighter knots with each passing hour. I started to lose hope. Maybe he'd seen it and deleted it instantly. Maybe he had a filter set up to block any message containing the name Vanessa. I wouldn't have blamed him. Then, on the 3rd morning, as I was listlessly scrolling through my emails, one popped up. The sender was Mark Peterson. My heart leaped into my throat. "Emma," the email said. "I'm not sure what I can do to help, but I'm willing to listen. I can talk for a few minutes after 5 p.m. today. Here is my cell number." That evening, I sat in my home office, the door closed. David sat in the chair opposite me, a silent, supportive presence. My hands were trembling as I dialed the number. "Hello?" His voice was cautious, wary. "Mark? It's Emma Collins. Thank you so much for calling me back. I really appreciate it." "No problem," he said, though his tone suggested it was, in fact, a problem. "What's this about?" I took a deep breath. "I'll get straight to the point. My family is currently, well, they're repeating the old story. The one where I was somehow responsible for your divorce from Vanessa." He let out a long, weary sigh, a sound heavy with years of frustration. "Emma, I'm really sorry to hear that, but I made a promise to myself that I would not get dragged back into that family's drama. I've moved on." I understand that completely, I said, my voice steady despite the frantic beating of my heart. And I wouldn't be calling if that was all it was. But it's not. I'm pregnant, Mark. And my parents have contacted me after 3 years of silence to demand that I allow Vanessa to co-parent my child. To be a second mother to make up for her infertility. There was a sharp, shocked intake of breath on the other end of the line. The professional caution in his voice vanished, replaced by pure, unadulterated disbelief. They did what? It gets worse, I said, my voice dropping. They also suggested that my husband should help Vanessa conceive a child of her own. Oh my God, he whispered, the disgust evident in his voice. She's still doing it. The same playbook. The same insane, narcissistic manipulation. I can't believe they're trying to pull you into it. The dam of his reluctance didn't just break, it exploded. Emma, listen to me. You were not the reason we got a divorce. You had absolutely nothing to do with it. The reason we split, the real reason, was because she tried to trap me. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles were white. What do you mean, trap you? We had been arguing for months about having kids, he explained, his voice now hard with the memory of it. I was on the fence. I loved her, and I was on the verge of reconsidering everything for her. The day I finally decided I was open to it, the day I was going to tell her, she sat me down, smiling like the cat that got the canary. And she told me, as if it were a cute little joke, that it was a good thing I was finally coming around, because she had secretly stopped taking her birth control pills 2 months earlier. She just confessed it. She thought I'd be cornered, that I'd have no choice but to accept it. She tried to trick me into having a child through deception. That's not a disagreement, Emma. That's a violation. That's why I filed for divorce the very next day. I closed my eyes, the ugly, final piece of the puzzle sliding into place. It was so much worse, so much more calculated, than I had ever imagined. Mark, I said, my voice low and intense. Would you be willing to help me prove that? They are trying to use my child as a pawn in their sick game. I will not let that happen. He was silent for a long, heavy moment. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. Then he said, his voice firm with resolve, she tried to ruin my life with her lies. It sounds like she's trying to do the same to you and your family. Yes. I'll help you. What do you need? Do you still have anything? I asked, hardly daring to hope. Any texts, emails, anything where she admitted it? I think so, he said. I saved everything for my lawyer back then. Let me dig through my old cloud storage. I'll send you anything I can find. An hour later, my phone pinged with an email notification. The subject line was one word, proof. Attached were 4 screenshots. They were text messages between him and Vanessa from the night their marriage ended. Vanessa, you're overreacting. I said it was a joke. Can't you take a joke? Mark, a joke? Lying to my face for months about being on birth control is a joke? You tried to trap me, Vanessa. This is insane. Vanessa, I just wanted a baby with you. I knew you'd be a great father. You would have come around eventually once you held our baby. Mark, I will never, ever trust you again. I'm calling a lawyer tomorrow. We're done. I stared at the screen, at the black and white, undeniable proof of her treachery. Her own words, typed out in a fit of arrogant desperation, were going to be her undoing. This wasn't just a silver bullet. This was a nuclear bomb. And I was about to press the button. I sat at my desk for a long time, the glow of the monitor illuminating my face in the darkened room. The folder on my desktop, labeled evidence, seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. My hands weren't shaking anymore. My mind was a sea of calm. The frantic, emotional storm had passed, leaving behind a cold, hard resolve. This wasn't an act of impulsive anger. This was a calculated, strategic maneuver. An act of survival. I opened my social media page. It felt like stepping onto a battlefield. I saw the posts from my mother and sister, still sitting at the top of my feed. I scrolled through the comments, a gallery of faces I had known my whole life, all offering sympathy and support to my abuser. Thinking of you, Vanessa. Stay strong. So sorry you have to deal with such cruelty. Each comment was a small stab, a fresh twist of the knife. I took a deep breath and began to type. I didn't use the fiery, emotional language they used. I didn't use exclamation points or all caps. My tone was the opposite of theirs. It was calm, factual, and utterly devastating. For the past 3 years, I have remained silent about the true circumstances surrounding my wedding and the subsequent estrangement from my parents and sister. I chose what I thought was peace over what I knew was the truth. I see now that I was wrong. My silence has not been interpreted as a desire for peace, but as an admission of guilt. It has allowed a false and poisonous narrative to fester, a narrative that is now being used to threaten the well-being of my unborn child and the stability of my family. That ends today. It's time for the truth. I laid it all out, a precise, chronological account. I described the pressure campaign to postpone my wedding. I detailed Vanessa's escalating lies, quoting some of the things my cousins had told me she'd said about me sabotaging her marriage. Then I described the final, cruelest act, the phone call to the venue. I detailed the panic, the frantic search for a new location, the heartbreak of seeing those empty chairs on what should have been the happiest day of my life. I let the cold, hard facts speak for themselves. Then, I seamlessly transitioned to the present. I wrote about the phone call that broke 3 years of silence. The chilling demand for my baby. The utterly depraved suggestion that my husband should impregnate my sister. I didn't embellish. I didn't need to. The bare facts were horrifying enough. You might read this and ask why my sister is so desperate, I wrote, my fingers flying across the keyboard. You might feel, as my family does, a great deal of pity for her struggles with infertility. But before you rush to comfort the victim, I need you all to know the real reason her marriage ended. The real reason she is not a mother today. And then, I dropped the bomb. Her marriage did not end because of a simple, tragic disagreement about having children. It ended because after months of her husband agonizing and finally considering changing his entire life plan for her, she confessed, as a joke, that she had secretly stopped taking her birth control pills in a calculated attempt to get pregnant and trap him. Her marriage ended not because of infertility, but because of a profound and unforgivable act of deception. Don't take my word for it. With a steady hand, I uploaded the 4 screenshots. The texts from Mark, clear as day. Vanessa's own words, her own admission, her own entitled justification, damning her for all the world to see. I tagged my mother, my father, and Vanessa, ensuring they couldn't pretend they hadn't seen it. I took one last, deep, steadying breath, my finger hovering over the mouse. David stood behind me, his hands resting gently on my shoulders, a silent wall of unwavering support. I clicked post. The effect was instantaneous and explosive. It was like dropping a lit match into a room full of gasoline. My phone, which I had placed face down on the desk, began to vibrate so violently it skittered across the wood. A relentless, unending stream of notifications. Comments, messages, friend requests, shares. I didn't look at any of them. I just sat there, watching the numbers on the post climb, 10 shares, 50, 100. The truth was spreading like wildfire, and it was burning their lies to ash. The first phone call came within 20 minutes. It was my Aunt Carol, the one who had sent the most self-righteous text. Her voice was choked with sobs. Emma, oh, Emma, are those texts real? Oh, my God, what have we done? I am so sorry. I listened to her cry for a moment, then I quietly ended the call. Her apology was too little, too late. About an hour later, just as the initial adrenaline rush was starting to fade, I heard a car screech to a halt on the street outside our house. Car doors slammed with a violent bang. Heavy, furious footsteps pounded up our driveway. Then, a frantic, percussive banging on our front door that rattled the whole house. "Emma! You open this door right now. You take that post down, you hear me? Take it down!" It was Vanessa's voice, a shrill, hysterical shriek of pure rage and panic. I could hear my father yelling something incoherent in the background. David looked at me, his face grim, a silent question in his eyes. I gave a single, sharp nod. We were going to face them. One last time. Together. We walked to the door, a united front. David unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door wide. There they were, a tableau of suburban fury. My parents and my sister, their faces twisted into ugly masks of outrage. Vanessa's eyes were wild, her hair disheveled. She looked like a cornered animal. "How could you?" she shrieked, lunging forward before my father grabbed her arm. "You've ruined my life. You've ruined everything." "No, Vanessa," I said, my voice was surprisingly calm, quiet but carrying with absolute clarity over her screams. "You ruined your own life. I just turned on the lights so everyone could see it." My father stepped forward, his face purple with rage, his finger jabbing at the air just inches from my face. "You will take that post down, young lady, or so help me God, you will regret this for the rest of your life." "Or what?" I interrupted, my voice as cold as ice. I took a step forward, and he actually flinched back. "What could you possibly do to me that you haven't already done? You disowned me at my wedding. You abandoned me for 3 years. You tried to give away my child. You tried to pimp out my husband. You have no power over me anymore. None of you do." I looked at each of them, one by one, holding their gaze until they looked away. My mother, weeping theatrically into a tissue. My father, sputtering, his threats dying in his throat. And Vanessa, finally speechless, her face pale and slack with the raw shock of being truly seen, without her victim narrative to hide behind, for the very first time in her life. Then, I did the one thing they never, ever expected. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't engage in their drama. I simply looked at them with a profound and bottomless pity, stepped back, and David and I closed the door in their faces. The solid, definitive click of the deadbolt sliding into place was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a cage door locking, from the inside. It was the sound of my freedom. In the days that followed, the fallout was a nuclear winter for my family. Their carefully constructed ecosystem of lies and enablement imploded. My phone, which I eventually brought myself to look at, was a battlefield of conflicting emotions. The relatives who had been so quick to condemn me were now falling into 2 camps, those who were silent with shame, and those who were sending me rambling, incoherent apologies via text and voicemail. My Aunt Carol, the one who had called crying, sent a 5-page email, a desperate, self-flagellating confession of how Vanessa had manipulated her for years, feeding her a steady diet of lies while playing the part of the tragic, sensitive soul. I read it, and I felt a flicker of something, not forgiveness, but a sad, weary understanding of how deep the poison had seeped into all of them. My parents, after 2 days of silence, sent one final email. It was breathtaking in its arrogance. "We are prepared to apologize for the misunderstanding if you agree to take down your post and issue a public statement clarifying the context. A conditional apology. An apology that was contingent on me erasing the truth and helping them save face. An apology that still framed their calculated, malicious behavior as a simple misunderstanding. It was the final, irrefutable proof that they were incapable of change, of genuine remorse." I read the email out loud to David, and we both just shook our heads, a kind of grim humor passing between us. I didn't even dignify it with a response. I simply dragged the message to the trash folder and then emptied the trash. Their words, their validation, their conditional forgiveness, it was all worthless to me now. Their apology was not the prize I was fighting for. My peace was. I spent the next hour performing a digital cleansing. I went through my phone contacts and my social media accounts and methodically began to block them. My mother. My father. Vanessa. Every aunt, uncle, and cousin who had actively participated in the campaign against me or who had remained silent when it mattered. With each decisive click of the block button, I felt a physical weight lift from my shoulders. It was a ritual. It was like I was pruning the dead, diseased branches from the tree of my life, allowing the healthy parts to finally get some sun. David, my wonderful, steadfast husband, took care of informing his family. He gave them a brief, factual rundown of the situation, and they immediately formed a protective circle around me, fielding calls from nosy relatives and making it unequivocally clear that I was not to be disturbed. They were my family now. The family I had chosen, and more importantly, the family that had chosen me, without condition or agenda. The silence that followed was profound, a stark contrast to the chaotic noise of the preceding week. The constant, low-grade hum of anxiety that had been the background music of my life for as long as I could remember finally faded. I could breathe again, deep, cleansing breaths. I could focus on my pregnancy, on the vibrant new life we were about to bring into the world. I had won. Not by being louder, or meaner, or more manipulative. But by being braver. I had stood up, armed with nothing but the unvarnished truth, and I had refused, finally and forever, to be their victim. The war was over, and the silence that settled over my life wasn't the cold, lonely silence of abandonment anymore. It was the warm, golden silence of peace. A few weeks after the storm had passed, I logged back into my social media account. The post was still there, a digital monument to the most painful and liberating chapter of my life. It had hundreds of comments and shares. It had done its job. I read it one last time, a detached observer of my own story. Then, with a sense of finality, I clicked delete. It wasn't for them. It wasn't because I was caving or having second thoughts. It was for me. The post had served its purpose. It had lanced the boil and exposed the sickness underneath for all to see. Now, it was time to let the wound heal. Keeping it there would be like constantly picking at a scab, keeping the trauma fresh. My future, and more importantly, my daughter's future, was not going to be defined by their toxicity. A month later, David and I packed up our lives. We sold our house in a whirlwind week and bought a beautiful little home in a quiet, leafy suburb 3 hours away. It was a place with good schools, friendly neighbors, and no history. A place where we could be the Collins family, not Emma, the one with the terrible sister. We gave the new address only to David's family and the 2 brave cousins who had stood by me from the very beginning. It was a true, clean, fresh start. My daughter was born on a sunny Tuesday in April, the kind of day that feels full of promise. We named her Hope. Holding her in my arms for the first time, this tiny, perfect, 7-pound being, I felt a love so fierce, so primal and protective, it literally took my breath away. Every tear I had shed, every painful confrontation, every sleepless night, it had all led to this moment, to her, safe in my arms. David was by my side, his eyes shining with unshed tears as he stroked her soft cheek. His mother, my mother-in-law, was my angel. She was there not out of obligation, but out of pure love, bringing me food, holding Hope so I could sleep, and radiating a gentle, maternal warmth that felt like a balm on the raw, wounded parts of my soul. This, I thought, my heart swelling with gratitude. This is what a family is supposed to be. On the second day, a young nurse came into my room, her expression a mixture of professional politeness and deep discomfort. "Ma'am," she said, her eyes darting towards the door. "There are some people here to see you. A man and a woman. They say they're your parents." My heart seized in my chest for a second. A cold dread washed over me. But it was fleeting. David stood up immediately, his face calm but resolute. "I'll handle this," he said, kissing my forehead. He and his father, who had been quietly reading in the corner, walked out into the hallway. I couldn't hear the exact words, but the conversation was brief and low. There was no shouting, no drama. When David and his dad came back into the room, their faces were serene. "They're gone," David said simply. "They won't be back. They had tried one last time. One final, desperate attempt to breach my walls, to force their way into my new life, to lay some claim on my happiness and my child. And they had been turned away. Not with anger or a dramatic scene, but with a quiet, firm, unbreachable boundary. They had no power here. They had no place in this room, this sacred space so full of love and new beginnings." Later that evening, long after visiting hours were over, I sat in the quiet of the dimly lit hospital room, rocking my daughter. The rhythmic creak of the chair was the only sound, apart from her soft, milky breaths. I looked down at her perfect, tiny face, so peaceful in sleep. I thought about the family she would never know. The grandmother who would demand instead of give, the grandfather who would enable instead of protect, the aunt who would poison instead of love. And for the first time, I felt no sadness. No anger. No grief. Only a profound and overwhelming sense of relief. I realized I had not taken something from my daughter. I had given her a gift of incalculable value. The gift of a life free from the suffocating, crippling cycle of toxicity that had defined my own childhood. I had fought a war so that she would only ever know peace. I leaned down, my lips brushing against her soft, downy hair, and whispered a promise. "I'm going to show you what a real family looks like. A family built on love and respect, not obligation and control. I promise." And as I looked at her, nestled safely and unconditionally loved in my arms, I smiled. A real, genuine smile that reached my eyes. I was no longer a shadow. I was a mother. I was a warrior. I was a survivor. And I was finally, completely, blessedly free. Thank you all so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I hope it can help someone else out there feel less alone. Have you ever had to cut off a toxic family member to protect your own peace? Let me know in the comments below. And if you found any part of this story helpful, please give it a like and subscribe for more.